Thank you all for joining us. This is a crazy week. And the best that we can tell is it looks like this is like the apex of the activity, and there's a lot that's going on. There's all sorts of deadlines that are required for legislation that has to happen this week. And I think that it's safe to say that there's going to be a big movement here to largely clear the decks this week, largely. I think a lot of miscellaneous sort of bills, there's going to be a lot of activity to get them either passed or tabled. And the legislature appears to be in the process of narrowing down their focus on the big hairy bills that are going to define the next 2 years.
There were 16 bills in House tax this morning.
Sheridan was there at 6:30 this morning to start hearings at 7 a.m. And she was covering everything that she could possibly cover with her two hands and both feet. So I think the big hairy issues that that we'll be necking down to over the course of this week and into the beginning part of next week are going to be related to taxes, right? And that encompasses both income tax issues, business equipment tax issues, and of course, property taxes. And then with that as well is, what is tied to all of those issues is House Bill 2, which is the bill that funds government spending for the course of the next 2 years. And so tweaking with any one of those sort of tax bills as a revenue obviously is going to affect what House Bill 2 looks like. And so there's a big crush of activity that's going on right now in an attempt to kind of get some of these other issues off the schedule so that we can focus on the tax revenue side of things and what that means for government spending going on. So I will tell you, on the property tax front, we are a long ways away from having anything that looks even remotely close to being palatable, I guess would be the best way to put it, for both Republicans, and we're talking about the split in the Republican Party and the Senate side in particular, Democrats, and the governor's office. And I don't know what that's going to look like, because as it stands today, Senate leadership has a dramatically different view of what property tax issues should look like compared to the House. And there's going to be a coming of the minds at some point. Now, whether those minds can get together and agree on one thing, I don't know. I think that's going to be the big issue here for the last quarter of this legislative session. Property taxes. In that mix that applies to the property tax issue is the governor's proposals around income tax, where he's wanting to lower the income tax rate.
Individual income tax.
Individual income tax rate, right? And so he's worked that into his budget. And so if that bill doesn't pass, then theoretically there's more dollars for property tax relief. So there's a lot in the mix right now, and we're doing our best to navigate it all. We heard yesterday, the Montana Chamber hosts what we call a business caucus every Monday at noon, where all of the major business lobbyists and government affairs folks attend a luncheon that we host every Monday at noon, where we share information, coordinate, collaborate on issues that affect the business community as a whole. We had Representative Lou Jones, who is the chair of the Appropriations Committee, come in and speak to that group yesterday on kind of what his preferred method is going forward, which is the governor's bill, House Bill 231. and how he believes that is going to be the solution that makes the most sense for property tax relief across the state. On this coming Monday, this next Monday, at our next business caucus luncheon, we're going to have Senator Greg Hertz, who is the chair of the Senate Tax Committee, come in and talk about what it is that they're thinking about. And we don't know all the details yet, but it is dramatically different than what they're thinking over on the House side of things.
On House Bill 231, that's that governor's proposal. Our main issue with it is that it bifurcates the tax rate on business, on commercial class 4 property, and that's a really slippery slope as we get into next legislative sessions. And so we're doing what we can and just trying to get a good lay of the land as to see. There are a lot of moving parts up here in the Capitol, and I'm sure if you've spent any amount of time there, you know, but it just seems to really be hitting this week, and
Yeah,
everybody's opinion, everyone's emotions,
yeah,
all attached to.
yeah, everybody's getting tired.
Mhm.
And I'll say on 231, to just elaborate briefly on Sheridan's point, is the proposal essentially draws a line amongst property taxpayers on the commercial side of the ledger. And says.
And on the house, the
And-
residential,
and on
but
the
that's not our
residential.
fight.
Right. And they're drawing the line and saying, you know, large property taxpayers on this side of the equation are different than property taxpayers on this side of the equation. Our concern is that once you draw that line amongst the business community between large property taxpayers and every other business, that when the state gets into a pickle going forward on property tax, the temptation is there to go in and turn the dial just a little bit or a little bit more,
So
or
you
maybe
can
a
fill a
little bit
lobster.
more on those larger sort of property taxpayers. And the current bill, the way that it is written, as we understand it, and we're working very closely with the Montana Taxpayers Association, is as that bill is currently written, is that it does provide some property tax relief to businesses that don't fit into that large property tax pay base that they've drawn the line on. And as a result of that line that they've drawn there and the line that they've drawn amongst the homeowners, like those higher end sort of homes, there will be a tax shift towards those larger property taxpayers. So think large brick and mortar sort of buildings across the state. Think about large employers, such as Stillwater Mine, the coal mines, the refineries. Some of those sort of folks will see a shift or additional property tax onto them, with some relief coming to the other classes of folks.
And there is some bit in that it would shift to maybe electrical generation or other sorts of natural resources in particular with the way our complicated tax structure is set up. And so even though their rate is not technically changing as we're just shifting chairs around the room, which I'm sure you've heard a lot at this point on day 60 whatever of the legislative session. And then a little bit of the fallacy that because you're a large business, you automatically are able to pay that additional cost, that additional burden. And with closing particularly natural resource companies lately who were really large employers, that is not always the case.
And I'll just make like kind of my personal sort of or professional sort of pitch on this, is that this property tax issue that we're facing in Montana is an issue that is not going to go away. It is only going to get worse because of the tax structure that we have in the state. And until we're willing as a state to have a different conversation than the one that we've had in the past with regard to different tax structures, i.e. a sales tax, this pressure on homeowners and businesses is only going to continue to increase. And the only way you're going to be able to, under the way our system is today, to be able to provide property tax relief to one class of property taxpayers is to largely to make another property tax payer class pay more. So you can, like, we've spent a lot of time here on this call, 10 minutes, talking about this issue, but you can understand, I think, the bit of the pickle that we're in as an organization that represents both large employers and small employers, and trying to figure out how we can navigate this thing the best for everyone, and having a keen eye towards what the long-term policy implications will be when you decide that you're going to differentiate large property taxpayers from everybody else. So,
And there does not seem to be appetite for a sales tax, right? That's not what we're saying, but there is definite growth towards that goal, I think it appears. Last week, Representative Brad Barker had House Bill 841 and 842. Those were amendments to, one was to a constitutional amendment to say that if we were to enact a sales tax, which already has a constitutional cap of 4%, then it would have to go directly to education. And so in turn, that would be reducing your 95 mills and reducing your local property taxes, ideally. And then as well as this morning, right, yesterday was the introduction deadline for revenue bills. And so that's kind of why we're seeing part of the big crush here. And Senator Shelley Vance had a 130-page bill to institute a sales tax. And I don't even see it till the hearing happened, but there's not quite enough time was what the general consensus of the Senate Taxation Committee. They can't get through that fast.
yeah, we're seeing a lot here this week. We're seeing a lot of bills that are introduced yesterday and hearings today. And bills that they're moving hearing dates on. It's like, well, you were scheduled to have a hearing today, but we're moving it to Thursday, or canceling them altogether. So it's
Messy.
a pretty frantic period of time right now. What else do you want to touch on?
I'll just hit some of our other priority areas that we came into the session with. Governor Gianforte did sign Medicaid expansion. That I don't even remember. We thought that's House Bill 245. We had it for so long, and now I can't even remember the bill number. But it passed both sides of the Capitol building up there and was signed into law last week. So that just repeals the sunset on the Medicaid expansion program, which we supported for workforce reasons and for our rural hospitals. And then on the TIF front, if you care about tax increment financing, lots of little bills have sailed through that just encourage transparency and understanding in that process. And then the one that's still kind of lingering out there is Senate Bill 2 that had a couple of concerns with what exactly newly taxable is in that regard. That was mostly concerned for local governments. And not a lot on housing this session. Lots of the consensus has been that let 2023 go into effect, let 2023 changes settle to figure out if that's helping anything. And then on the childcare front, we did hear Senate Bill 321 last week. That was our tax credit package bill. Thank you to those of you who were able to join us for that hearing. We had great testimony from Brett's RV and his 11-year-old daughter with their on-site childcare there, and not being realistic about our chances with those bills, but I think really important to bring the concerns and the potential solutions surrounding childcare and our workforce into that building.
I see a couple folks on here that'll be interested at a minimum in a couple of these items here. One, Montana Environmental Policy Act, MEPA, is the primary vehicle that is used in state permitting. So if you're opening up a mine, or you're needing a permit that requires a state permit, you have to go through a procedural sort of an activity that's called a look before you leap sort of thing. It's tied into the Montana State Constitution and the right to a healthful and clean environment. And as all of you know, the Montana Supreme Court ruled on the Held decision, the Held versus State of Montana, which really opened up a Pandora's box for state permitting, because it is essentially requiring the analysis of greenhouse gas emissions from projects. And so it created a lot of uncertainty, that ruling. And so we've been working very closely with the Department of Environmental Quality and a stakeholder group to get behind legislation that tries to put some sideboards on MEPA so that we don't end up in this endless analysis paralysis that seems to happen in some of these sort of permitting. And that's our big concern with the Held decision, is that it opens up a Pandora's box of analyzing and then reanalyzing, and then you have an argument over whether your analysis was sufficient enough. And so we're trying to put some sideboards on this, because we believe that this is one of those issues that doesn't just apply to natural resource development. It has the potential to apply to every project that requires a state permit. So think gravel pits, think about highway construction, certain housing development that requires permits. If it's in a controversial area, could be some objections and protests as a result of the Held decision and being forced to analyze greenhouse gases. So we're trying to put some sideboards on that, and those bills are moving along, and we're hopeful for those. On the tort reform, right, this is kind of a Jeff bucket. In particular, I know, Jeff, you're interested in the stuff that we're doing on tort reform, because it does have an impact on insurance rates cumulatively over time amongst the way insurance companies operate in Montana and how they rate businesses and individuals. And we're continuing to move some of those bills that are important to us. We're running into some sticky points along the way. Some of them are a little bit more controversial with some members of the legislature than others. And so we're continuing to try to move those along. One of the things that is really evident to us during this legislative session is that there are certain issue areas that that we depend upon Democrat majorities of the Democrat legislature holding a block of Democrats together and then trying to pick up a few Republicans to advance a proposal. And there are other issues that we're dependent upon holding Republicans and trying to pick up a few Democrats on. And so as we look at these issues that we're trying to advance for the business community, they're truly bipartisan, truly nonpartisan that way, because there are different issues that affect different sort of political philosophies, and we have to build those coalitions regardless of what the issue is. And sometimes it's working with Democrats and sometimes it's working with Republicans.
Indeed. To bring it back to just this morning, I did get to support a bill that would allow the new employer tax credit to apply to construction apprentices, which is fun as we try to work on infrastructure in our workforce, making sure that we have the workforce to build our infrastructure, I think is important. And then there were a couple bills. I know some folks will care about House Bill 914 and House Bill 916. We did ultimately decide to stay out of those just this morning because they are kind of deep and complex and there's a lot of different layers to it. They had a lot of advocates on their respective sides for I think some of the things that we would agree with, but they're also taking some of that money and putting, at least one of them, and putting it into SB 90, which is one of the other potential tax options to House Bill 231. There's a couple other tax bills floating around there. So just to loop it all back, everything is tax.
Everything's tax.